The aroma of roast chicken filled the room, mingling with Richard's nervous laughter and Helen's persistent questions. Each time she mentioned family, a knot formed in my stomach, a constant reminder of the expectation weighing heavily upon me. After all, isn't it time you two started thinking about children? The sentence sliced through the air like a sharp knife, and the disdain on my mother-in-law's face was undeniable. I could feel the humiliation burning my cheeks as everyone around the table forgot that the real choice about family is mine. My name is Clara, 36, a clinical psychologist specializing in family therapy. I've spent my life working with group dynamics, helping others establish healthy boundaries and shape supportive family environments. Yet, there, at the table, my expertise felt like useless baggage. Frustration and helplessness danced in my heart, adrenaline pulsing with each beat. Instead of reacting, I took a deep breath, counted to 10, and sought the calm a therapist should exude. What was supposed to be a family meal was turning into a psychological battlefield. Helen had always been subtle in her pressure. I remember a lunch where, looking at my plate, she asked, "Clara, when will we start hearing children's laughter in this house?" I was taken aback, and for a moment, I thought I could let it go. But each question, each comment, built a higher emotional wall between us. The pressure was a thin but suffocating film, and I knew I had to act. The conversation that night continued to revolve around the imminent arrival of more grandchildren, while George, my father-in-law, acquiesced with a nod, almost always entangled in the passivity that characterized him. He was the pillar of family tradition, a rock refusing to move, even as the tide shifted. And amidst that discourse, I realized how much this expectation wasn't just a detour on our journey. It was a disguised betrayal, a silent murder of my own dreams of freedom. As the dishes were cleared and dessert served, a thought echoed. What do you do when those who should support you are the ones who oppress you most? I felt a vast emptiness in my mind, a space that, until then, had been filled with my convictions. I lowered my gaze, trying to hide the wound that was opening, but it was more alive than ever. Therapy hadn't predicted this pain, hadn't prepared me for the humiliation that had settled at the table. That night, something inside me began to stir. The pain and indignation transformed into energy, a lit spark that couldn't be ignored. Determination grew within my mind. I knew that, however painful it might be, it was time to act, to break free from the shackles of expectation and reclaim control over my destiny. I needed to step away from the role of obedient daughter and become the protagonist of my own story. The first step would be to formulate a plan. After dinner, while Richard said goodbye to his parents, I walked around the house, allowing myself to be consumed by the solitude of the place. The living room, usually welcoming, now seemed like a battlefield. I looked at the portraits on the walls, images of happy moments, but now each photo felt like a link in a chain binding me to the past. I went to my workspace which, although used for sessions with patients, now became my refuge and the foundation of my transformation. Mere walls of an office, filled with children's drawings and bookshelves full of books I had read about families and psychology. But now, in the silence of that place, I had the chance to rewrite my own narrative. I began to jot down thoughts, strategies, and possibilities for the future. What were my true desires? How could I begin to walk a path towards the family I truly wanted? Minutes turned into hours as I reflected, full of ideas, but still grappling with the uncertainty of a future that seemed hazy. When Richard returned, I was upright, a new resolve in my being. He noticed the change in my gaze, but said nothing. Inside, a storm of emotions was calming down. I have a plan, I thought. They forgot that the real choice about family is mine, and I was determined to articulate it, even if everyone around me opposed me. This was the first step in what I was about to build. From that moment on, there would be no more surprises or passivity. What lay ahead wouldn't be easy, but I felt I had rekindled an inner flame. My journey in search of control and freedom had begun, and I wouldn't let myself be stopped now. The memory of that dinner still hung in my mind like a heavy cloud on a sunny day, draining my energy and enthusiasm. It was an ordinary day, months earlier, when my feelings were more confused and less defined. At the family lunch, as conversations flowed cheerfully between recipes and travels, everything changed when Helen posed her question, like a weight impossible to ignore. "Clara, when are you two going to start thinking about children?" Her gaze, fixed and persuasive, pierced me, unleashing a storm of emotions. I felt as if I were being stripped bare, exposed to an expectation that wasn't mine, and which now became an unbearable burden. From the start of my relationship with Richard, I noticed the signs. Meetings with his family tested my resilience, a minefield of veiled comments about what it meant to be a true wife in a traditional family. The pressure didn't come from one single source. It spread like an invisible current, pushing me into a space I didn't want to occupy. Christmas of my first year with them was a revealing experience. At a festive table, full of lights and smiles, Helen dropped another one of her insinuations. "You'll want to start a family, won't you, dear?" Richard beside me smiled nervously, his constrained expression making it clear he was between a rock and a hard place. That night, his expectation regarding my desires became even clearer. Every time we talked about the future, the pressure increased. Helen's insinuations became more frequent, and her ever-watchful gaze hoped I'd fit into a mold that felt at odds with my very essence. Then there was a large family dinner on Father's Day, where the looks were a combination of love and expectation, a desire to nurture that became oppressive. These moments became markers in our lives, representing the real battle between what "let's be a family" meant versus what "let's love each other and respect what makes us happy" should be. I felt consumed by the idea that, somehow, I'd entered a game whose rules weren't mine. While I desired to be a mother, the way it was being presented felt imposed, and the desire for freedom began to outweigh the pressure. Reflecting, I realized that the desire to have children, as my friends often said, was intrinsically linked to a social cycle that didn't satisfy me. What did I really want? 15 minutes of solitude led to a shocking revelation. I didn't want to be just another woman in society following the traditional path. At that Christmas dinner I referred to, a slight smile on Richard's face only fueled the idea of what we should be, but didn't express his inner anxieties. He, a generous and loving man, was trapped between the desirable idealization of fatherhood and the polarized reality of a wife who may or may not want that, especially when pressured by his own family's expectations. With each new gathering, each relative questioning my motherhood plans, I felt the expectation tighten into a knot in my stomach, a pain that settled in as an unwelcome companion, forcing me to understand that the path everyone seemed to want for me was becoming a dead-end maze. I no longer felt free, and at the same time, the idea of being a mother began to feel like an imposed condition rather than a latent desire. It was as if I was being cornered between closing walls, voice after voice, reminding me that I should, somewhere, feel this was my calling. Weekdays' conversations became a constant repetition, and, at some point, I started to shut down. A subtle but significant change began to occur within me. I didn't want to be just the woman who conformed to societal expectations. The weight of guilt for not meeting expectations created an internal conflict that couldn't be ignored. In therapy, I always emphasized the importance of setting boundaries, but in my own life, everything became a challenge. What to do when the person who should be your safe harbor is also a subordinate to family expectations? This was the question echoing in my mind. Finally, in a moment of clarity during a busy session, I realized I needed an honest and direct conversation with Richard. I was clear and decided to put everything in firmer terms. "Richard, we need to talk about our future. External pressures seem to be separating us, and I feel we need to discuss what we truly want." He hesitated, a mixture of surprise and apprehension reflected in his eyes. The dynamics of the conversation, initially light and superficial, gained depth. "But Clara, I don't want you to feel this way," he replied, his voice filled with emotion, but also confusion. There was a genuine desire on his part to support whatever I decided, but the protection of his family ties became a heavy anchor. The conversation didn't offer the clarity I expected. It only fueled the expectation that what occupied our lives had to be confronted and addressed. The tension that formed was etched not only in our relationship, but as a thin line of expectations that weren't our own. I knew the need to be open about how I felt was constant. On a clear day, amidst my reflections, a new possibility began to emerge: adoption. The image of motherhood was shaping itself so that I could give love and security to a child, regardless of biological ties. It was a fundamental shift in my perspective. Not only that, but this idea meant I could free myself from the expectations of creating a family in the way others desired. That's how I began to articulate a plan. What I truly wanted was divided into two desires: to be a mother, and not to be pushed into a space of conformity. With that in mind, the idea of adoption as a possibility became more of a glimmer of hope than a great challenge. Every time I thought about this choice, I felt a wave of freedom spreading through my body. From that moment on, the possibility of building the family I longed for began to take shape before me like a bright light. This desire to create a healthy and welcoming family environment, free from external pressures, solidified into something tangible. What had begun as external pressure was transforming into self-affirmation. Thus, the dynamic began to change not only within me, but also in my relationship with Richard and how I positioned myself in relation to others. The real choice about family would be mine. So, from now on, this journey became not only mine, but the way I shaped it would make everything more meaningful, more real. What they taught me about exactly how family ties should be now became a distant, empty memory. It was time to claim my own place, and with each passing day, I felt closer to my goal. The next stage was just beginning. With the idea of adoption firmly rooted in my mind, a new journey began. Determined to understand the process, I entered a world of information that could guide me toward the family I so longed for. The morning sun gently filtered through the window of my office, a space that now served not only to attend to my patients, but also as a refuge of hope and planning. My first contact was with a local adoption agency, and anxiety mingled with expectation as I waited for the social worker to answer. Finally, Anna, a warm and experienced woman, answered the phone. As we talked, I felt that her every word opened new doors in my mind. She spoke about the stages of the process: interviews, documentation, and the inevitable psychological evaluation. Every detail seemed to pull me into the new reality I dreamed of. I needed that knowledge, not only for myself, but also to understand how I could become a part of a child's life, aiming to give love and security. It's essential that you are certain of your decision, Clara. Adoption isn't just bringing a new life home. It's also an emotional and psychological commitment, Anna said, her voice sounding like a call to responsibility. Each word resonated within me, making me question even more what I was willing to do to make this dream a reality. A child wouldn't be a project. It was a new life that would have its needs, its fears, and its past. After the call, a sense of determination settled upon me, but I knew I needed to share this idea with Richard. The nervousness was palpable. How would he react to this vision that was beginning to take shape in my mind? What would he say if he realized that adoption was how I wanted to build our family? The pressure I felt from his family still weighed on my shoulders, like a shadow I couldn't dissipate. I decided it was time to take another step. With that in mind, I arranged visits to several adoption agencies that Anna had recommended. The first shelter I visited was an old-looking building. Its walls seemed to have many stories to tell. Upon entering, I was greeted by an environment that, despite its wear, radiated an energy of hope and the need for love. Children were playing, some laughing loudly while others watched with a wistful look. Marina, the shelter's assistant, took me on a tour. As we explored the place, she shared her experiences, and each one further immersed me in the perspective that these children needed loving homes. Each of them has lived through difficult stories and needs a welcoming space where they can start over. she explained, and the weight of her words fell like a cloak upon me. Then, during the visit, a little girl named Sophia approached. About 4 years old, her eyes shone with curiosity and hope. She took my hand and asked, "Will you take me home?" Her innocence touched me deeply, and that moment, though fleeting, made my heart ache. I knew I was there only to learn, but at that moment, I realized the weight of reality. Each of those children was waiting for someone who believed in them. The visit to the shelter left me with a mixture of enchantment and sorrow. When I returned home, the desire to do something meaningful pulsed in my chest, but the responsibility that accompanied this choice made everything more intense. And now, more than ever, it was crucial that I talk to Richard. The tension between us increased as the days went by. That night, after a quiet dinner, I needed to address the issue. I looked into his eyes and realized it was time to open my heart. "Richard, we need to talk about adoption." His expression quickly changed. I noticed the growing concern. He hesitated, and as his words came out, I could see the internal battle that was taking place. "But Clara, are you serious? Do you really want to go down this road without having discussed it together?" "Yes, I'm serious, and I truly feel this is what we should consider," I declared, seeking a certain determination in my voice. "I visited a shelter and met children who are waiting for a home, and I wish we could be a solution for that." The air was thick with tension, but the sincerity of what I was saying seemed to find a resonance within him. Richard quickly recovered, his face reflecting a mixture of confusion and curiosity. He began to stammer, "Clara, I'm not against adoption, but I always imagined we'd have biological children, and what will my parents say?" For the first time, I saw the weight of family standards crushing his aspirations. It was evident that tradition was creating barriers, and I needed to help him overcome them. "We need to approach this as a team. Adoption could be a way to build the family we want, shielding ourselves from external pressures," I replied, wishing he could see how much this meant to me. "We're talking about creating something truly ours, without the expectations placed upon us." Looking into his eyes, I knew this conversation could be a turning point. Richard took a deep breath, pondering. Silence hung between us, heavy with unspoken meanings and shared hopes. For a moment, I could feel his heart and mind in conflict. Gently touching his hand, I said, "I want this to happen with you by my side. This is more than just an individual decision. It's about our life together." Finally, he spoke. "Clara, I'm willing to consider this. I'll tell you that I need time to process all of this. It's a big change." Relief washed over me, and a new hope blossomed within me. There was a path forward. With this conversation, I realized we were building a safe space for both of us. What started as family pressures was slowly transforming into a mutual cooperation in pursuit of something meaningful. My desire for a healthy home had become shared, and this union had the potential to change not only our lives, but also the lives of others. The expectation that had previously weighed me down began to dissipate, giving way to a new reality. As we talked about adoption and the plans it entailed, we were two hearts yearning for the possibility of creating a home filled with love. The journey had begun, and transformation awaited us. I was about to open a new chapter, where the real choice about family would finally be ours, and I was excited about what the future held. The conversation with Richard was revealing, but navigating this journey toward adoption was still full of nuances I needed to explore. With each passing day, my commitment to uncovering the details of the process deepened. Having decided that adoption was the path I wanted to follow, I realized how vital it would be to prepare, not only for myself, but also for the child who would become a part of our lives. In the following weeks, I dedicated myself to investigating every aspect of the adoption process. The morning sun illuminated my office as I spoke with social workers, read books, browsed the internet, and participated in support groups. The sea of information was vast, and as I navigated it, I understood that adopting was more than simply providing a home. It was also about embracing a child's history, their experiences, and what they brought with them. One afternoon, I scheduled a visit to a shelter, knowing that the interaction could be a turning point. The building was full of vibrant images and colors, escaping the vision of neglect associated with some temporary homes. I could barely contain the anticipation bubbling inside me, a mixture of hope and apprehension about what I was about to encounter. As I entered, I was greeted by a friendly employee named Carla, who quickly became my guide. The shelter had a dedicated team, and Carla was the embodiment of everything that could be welcoming. Our eyes met, and I perceived the passion she had for the cause. "You must be Clara. I'm so glad you came." Her tone was encouraging, as if she already knew what I was looking for. As we walked through the colorful rooms, she shared information about how the shelter worked and the support they offered to adoptive parents. "Here, we prioritize creating a safe and welcoming environment. Each child has their own story, and each one may need something different when adapting to a new home," she explained, her deep eyes reflecting an understanding that seemed like another level of empathy. My heart ached as I looked at the faces of the little ones around me. Each joyful smile carried with it a story of overcoming and resilience, and I wanted to be a part of that transformation. Carla walked to a room where some children were drawing. "These are our artists," she exclaimed. A boy named Daniel, with tousled hair and a charming smile, looked up at us with bright eyes. "Want to know what I'm drawing?" he asked, with an enthusiasm that made my heart throb. I nodded, and he showed a vibrant image of a smiling sun surrounded by colorful clouds. The innocent gesture and genuine joy touched me. I wasn't there just to observe. I was starting to feel that I could give something more to these children. Love, a home, belonging. After the visit, the drive home reflected a mixture of emotions. I was determined to get involved in the process, to learn as much as I could. In the following days, meetings with social workers and support group meetings became my routine. With each new conversation, a new aspect of adoption unfolded before me. My fears and insecurities began to dissipate, giving way to a renewed sense of purpose. One night, determined to share everything I had learned with Richard, I prepared a special dinner. I made sure to create an intimate atmosphere where we could talk without interruption. As I tended to the tomato sauce simmering slowly, I imagined how I could fill this table with children in the near future, the life I always dreamed of beginning to materialize. When he came home and saw the delicately set table, his eyes lit up. "What's going on here?" he laughed, a tone of curiosity in his voice. "I just want to celebrate the path we're on," I said, trying to keep the tone light, but it occurred to me that he might also feel pressured to make decisions. During dinner, I shared all the details of my visits, my conversations with Carla, and the emotions I'd experienced. I talked about Daniel and his art, and how each child carries a unique light that just needs to be discovered. The excitement seemed to resonate in the air. However, there was a hesitation in Richard's expression as we discussed the plans forming in my mind. "Clara, this is all wonderful, but what if the child doesn't adjust? We're risking opening old wounds." "You yourself said that children carry difficult stories," Richard said, his words expressing concern. What I'd interpreted as insecurity was, in fact, a sign of how much he truly cared. He wanted to protect me as much as he wanted to do the right thing. "I understand your fears. It's a journey, and there will be challenges we'll likely face," I said, offering a sympathetic look. "But that's part of our role. We may not have all the answers, but the intention of offering love and a safe home is already a valuable step." The look he exchanged with me felt like a small promise that, together, we could overcome any challenge. After dinner, we decided we should seek more information on how to help a child feel comfortable in our home. We scheduled a visit with a therapist specializing in supporting adoptive parents and their children. I contacted Michelle, the professional Laura had recommended, and we arranged an initial session. On the day of our meeting, the atmosphere was charged with anticipation. Michelle was a strong and warm woman whose energy immediately calmed my nerves. Throughout our conversation, she addressed the emotional aspects of what to expect when adopting. The reality can be complex, and the truth is that both the child and the parents will need space to grow, she said. One of the most challenging aspects of adoption is building trust, she continued. The child may have past experiences that teach them to doubt the safety around them. Therefore, honesty and patience will be essential. As I listened, I realized this would require a commitment from all of us, a commitment to vulnerability and a willingness to open ourselves to each other. After a few weeks of preparation, meetings, and learning, the anticipation of taking the final step began to take shape. We started considering the functionality of our house, how to make the spaces more welcoming for a child who would one day become part of our home. What toys and books should we have ready? Excitement took over. Richard and I teamed up on a sunny afternoon and decided to reorganize the living room. We set up a cozy reading nook with cushions, toy shelves, and a small table for art activities. What started as a new space became a symbol of our commitment, a foundation for the loving home we were about to create. But at the same time, I couldn't help but feel anxious about Helen and George's reaction. They were still a constant presence in our lives, and the very act of adopting distanced them from what they expected of me as their daughter-in-law. In a conversation with Richard, I opened my heart. What if they don't accept it? I'm afraid this will create a chasm between us. Do you still want to proceed in the same way, or should we keep them at arm's length for a while? I asked. Richard turned to me, holding my hand firmly. I will always value our decisions and mutual support. He whispered, we don't need to let their opinions prevent us from doing what we believe is best for our family. His look was full of conviction, and it lifted a weight from my heart. Time passed, and the process of adopting a child began to move forward. By the end of the month, we had finalized all our documents and were ready to attend the adoption meetings. After a few weeks of preparation, there was something in the air, a scent of anticipation spreading through our house. I knew we were about to take a big step. But at the same time, inside me, a shadow of insecurity still lingered. What would happen when the child arrived? I wondered if Richard would continue to feel comfortable in his role, and if we could maintain a healthy family unit under external pressures. And it was precisely in this space of uncertainty that Michelle's teachings became even clearer. With each new day, I felt that the moment of transformation was drawing closer. The lights were coming on in our house, not just with physical, but also emotional preparation. The symbolic was now becoming a reality, and I could feel the potential unfolding before us. We were ready to walk the path we would create alongside another life. A new dawn was approaching, and even as worries lingered, I felt more determined than ever. We were open to whatever the future held, and the magic of adoption was about to transform not only our lives, but within us, our concept of family as a whole. The journey continued, and each day was a new page written in this story that was only just beginning to be told. The days were dragging on with an electrifying mix of anxiety and anticipation, a whirlwind of emotions that filled every corner of the house. The preparations for the arrival of our future daughter began to come alive, and the atmosphere reflected this new energy. The toys were carefully arranged, the books positioned on the shelves, and the child's room was almost ready, embellished with soft colors and images that captured an enchanted imagination. However, uncertainties still weighed on my heart. The possibility of welcoming a child made my spirit vibrate with joy, but it also tested all my fears. What would happen when she arrived? Would Richard still feel comfortable in his new role? Would we be able to maintain a healthy family environment under external pressures? What if our way of creating a home clashed with the expectations and beliefs of our parents? These questions tormented me, but the determination to seek answers outweighed my insecurity. It was in one of these moments of introspection, while looking out the window at the lush spring gardens, that I decided that the words of therapist Michelle should guide my perspective. She always emphasized the importance of embracing vulnerabilities and strengthening family communication. So, I suggested to Richard that we have a deeper meeting, where we could openly discuss our emotions and anxieties about what was to come. The conversation started smoothly, but soon delved into deeper layers of emotion. Richard, the idea of having a child to care for is wonderful, but I feel we should be aware of our insecurities, I said, trying to give him space to open up as well. He took a deep breath, and his eyes reflected the internal struggle I knew he was facing. I just want to do the right thing. All this change is intense, and sometimes I feel like I might fail," he replied, his voice tinged with vulnerability. "You're not alone in this," I reassured him, intertwining my hand with his. "We're in this together, and every step we take will be mutual support. Sometimes, we need to allow ourselves to feel the fear and uncertainty, because it means we're investing our heart and soul." Looking into his eyes, I saw the determination beginning to form again. The trust we had built in recent weeks was beginning to solidify. In the following weeks, we decided it was time to involve more people in our journey. Remembering Michelle's words about the importance of emotional support, we organized a dinner with friends who had experience with adoption, so we could hear their stories and learn from them. As a psychologist, I've always believed that sharing experiences could illuminate the path, and Richard was eager for this. The day of the dinner arrived, and our friends arrived punctually, bringing a colorful array of dishes and laughter. The table was full of food and, above all, an atmosphere of hope and good energy. As we began the conversation, I highlighted how we were now a new family, about to expand our concept of love and acceptance. One of our friends, Anna, who had adopted 2 children, spoke about her own experience. "Adoption is a journey of ups and downs," she began. "There will be days when you feel lost, and others when you know you've made the right decision of your life." Each account she shared touched me deeply. She continued, "The most important thing is to be open with your children from the beginning. They need to know that they are safe and that you love them regardless of what happened before. The truth is, they will carry their own stories, and it's up to you to create a space where they feel comfortable sharing." As she spoke, all the pieces I had begun to assemble in my mind seemed to finally come together. "Knowing that you were there, that you faced difficulties and knew how to create love amidst the chaos, inspires me," said Richard, winking at Anna, receiving the friend's welcoming gaze. The conversation went on for hours, moving through topics on implementing routines, the importance of creating a welcoming environment, and the expectations we would have regarding discipline and learning. I felt a new spark of hope growing inside me. Everything was starting to fall into place. As the weeks passed, our preparations became increasingly concrete. A summons for the meeting to introduce our future daughter arrived, and it was surprisingly exciting. When I saw the invitation with the date and the name of the institution, my heart raced. "I think this will be an important step," I murmured to Richard, holding the paper firmly. He looked into my eyes and said, "We'll be ready, no matter what comes." The day of the meeting finally arrived. The sun shone in the blue sky, heralding a new chapter not only in our lives, but also in the life of a child who was about to enter our hearts. Upon arriving at the shelter, a whirlwind of emotions erupted within me. Nervousness, fear, hope, love, all the feelings mixing together. After a warm welcome, Clara guided us to the waiting room, where we would finally meet the child who could become part of our lives. Every minute seemed to drag on, the anticipation pure as fireworks. Finally, the long-awaited moment happened. Clara entered with a little girl with curly hair and bright eyes. "This is Isabel," Clara said, introducing her with a warm smile. Isabel looked cautiously at us, but soon a shy smile formed on her face. It was as if our world had stopped for a brief moment, and all we could feel was the connection that was forming. "Hi, Isabel. It's so nice to meet you," I said, trying to break the ice. She seemed a little nervous, but at the same time, there was something in her gaze that made me believe she felt the loving energy around us. Richard knelt down to her height and said, "We're so happy you're here today. We hope we can be friends." Soon, Clara stepped aside, giving us space to interact. The conversation started hesitantly, but with each exchange of glances, warmth emanated between us. We started playing with some of the toys we had brought. She began to open up and little by little started talking about what she liked. "I like to draw and paint," Isabel said, her eyes shining, as she ventured into a playchair. It was indescribable. Time seemed to flow differently as we were enveloped in a world of her stories, dreams, and hopes. Words began to flow naturally between us, and the atmosphere was filled with laughter and affection. After a few lovely hours together, Clara returned and observed the interaction with a satisfied look. "I knew you three would have a special connection," she said with a smile. Looking at each other, my mind filled with images of a future where our home would be full of life, where we would watch Isabel grow and evolve. "Our journey together has only just begun, Isabel," I said, feeling a tear roll down my cheek. Richard took her hand and added, "And we welcome you with open arms. You're part of our family." At the end of our first meeting, after saying goodbye to Isabel, I looked at Richard and felt a wave of joy wash over me. We decided to go home and later talk about the next steps. I learned that adoption wasn't just about giving birth, but about growing together, creating bonds not based solely on blood, but on the genuine love that builds day by day. As we drove home, happiness filled our hearts. We were ready to start a new life and a new home together. As the shadows of darkness began to fall over the city, I knew this new journey was just beginning, and that the magic of adoption was about to transform all our lives. Isabel's story and ours were intertwined in a shared destiny, and I couldn't be more grateful for it. The magic of adoption began to materialize rapidly after our first meeting with Isabel. The atmosphere at home was charged with new energy as we prepared to officially bring her into our lives. The changes we implemented in our house became a reflection of the internal changes we were experiencing. We were a new home about to welcome a new life. However, anxiety also hung in the air. Adoption day was approaching, and I often found myself immersed in thoughts about what this new life would be like. How would Isabel adapt to the new environment? And how would we handle the difficult moments that would inevitably come? I knew adoption involves challenges, but the idea of a turbulent future couldn't diminish the hope that bloomed in my heart. That week, we decided to visit the shelter so we could spend more time with Isabel. The sunny day reflected all the excitement we were feeling. During the trip, we exchanged excited glances, our hearts vibrating with the anticipation of once again discovering more about this little girl who had entered our lives in such a meaningful way. I caressed Richard's hand. He smiled, and it reassured me. When we arrived, Clara was waiting for us at the entrance with a welcoming smile. I knew she shared our joy and nervousness. "Ready for another amazing day?" she asked, holding Isabel's hand. Isabel, with her round face and curly hair, waved shyly. Richard and I exchanged a knowing look, our emotions overflowing. "Hi, Isabel. We're so happy to see you again," I said, trying to make her feel comfortable. "Look, we brought a gift." Richard then brought out a small package. Inside, there was a colorful set of crayons and a drawing pad, already filled with some of her artwork. Isabel's eyes lit up, and a smile formed on her face. "Yay! Can I draw a dinosaur?" she exclaimed, grabbing the crayons with enthusiasm. The connection we had already begun to form intensified at that moment. The atmosphere was filled with joy, our voices sounding like music as we talked about what we could create together. Several activities unfolded naturally, and the child began to explore her new freedom. At one point, Clara left us alone so we could deepen our relationship, and that's how the lighthearted conversation flowed. "Isabel, do you like to paint? What do you want to put in this notebook?" Richard asked, as they settled side by side in the outdoor patio. She replied with genuine excitement. "I have a friend named Al. He also likes dinosaurs," she said, as she passionately drew a magnificent green dinosaur flying under a smiling sun. Richard and I watched, admiring the unpretentious way in which the pages began to fill with her life and imagination. It was as if, in that small moment, the chain of our stories was intertwining. The following days passed in a mix of euphoria and preparation. A series of appointments brought us closer to the formalization of the adoption. We participated in meetings and workshops, educating ourselves about the emotional and behavioral nuances of adopted children. The hypothetical visions of our new routine began to transform into concrete plans. I felt equally excited and nervous. And so, the long-awaited day approached. The day Isabel would officially become part of our family. The excitement pulsed within me as I looked at the calendar, eager to enter a new chapter. The date marked on the reminders was, for me, a symbol of all the changes that would occur. On the morning of the big day, the energy was electric. I woke up early and prepared a special breakfast, something that could kickstart a future filled with love. As I frothed milk for a cappuccino, each burst from the steam wand made my heart race with a mix of anxiety and joy. I wanted the day to start perfectly. Richard entered the room, a radiant smile on his face. "The coffee smells amazing. I think we're ready," he said, taking my hand and pulling me into a tight embrace. I felt filled with hope and certainty as we walked towards the journey we were about to embark on. Our visit to the adoption agency was full of smiles and emotions. When the social worker brought Isabella to us, my heart leaped. There she was, with her little backpack and many drawings in her hand, the representation of her own story that would now intertwine with ours. What was happening wasn't just a new beginning for her, it was a monumental step for all of us. However, when the signing session began, the atmosphere in the room changed. It was filled with thoughtful heads and scattered papers amidst a mix of documents and stamps. Isabella was quiet, her gaze fixed on the floor. "Isabella, sweetheart, know that you don't need to be afraid. We're here to protect you," I reassured her. But she just shook her head. The moment to finalize the adoption arrived, and as Richard and I signed the papers, an overwhelming feeling of freedom and responsibility washed over me. Looking at Isabella, who was watching with an expectant expression, I felt we were transitioning from mere someday to today. You know, when the social worker handed over the certificate, I couldn't help the tears that streamed down my face. It was the culmination of what we were about to face as a family. "Congratulations, family," Clara exclaimed, and at that moment, it seemed the entire room was filled with joy and celebration. Isabella smiled shyly, and perhaps, for the first time, began to understand what it meant to have a home. Leaving the agency, we walked towards our new home. The sun was setting, and the sky was adorned with streaks of orange and pink, as if nature itself was celebrating a new chapter. Richard and I, our hearts beating in sync, knew that together we would face any challenges that came our way. Isabella, holding tightly to each of our hands, seemed more relaxed between us. The way home had never seemed so beautiful. When we arrived, we entered together, and at that instant, a wave of emotions washed over us. I looked at the room we had prepared, thinking of all the possibilities that were opening up. We would be a family, and every little moment would count. In the months that followed, we learned what it truly meant to be a family. We had laughter, tears, and the whole gamut of emotions that come with everyday life. Isabella's interaction with her new home often challenged us, but it also brought to light the beauty of growing together. Each day was an opportunity for building and renewal. I remember one day in particular, while painting with Isabella, realizing that with every stroke, we were drawing not just figures, but also the very history and bonds that united us. My eyes sparkled when she turned to me and said, "You're the best mom in the world, Clara." I could barely contain my emotion. That simple acknowledgement meant everything. Acceptance was beginning to blossom. Richard, in his clear connection with Isabella, began to develop a new way of engaging, taking time to tell stories and play as a family. It was as if the shadows of the past had been replaced by a future full of perspective and love. And there was no greater magic than that. The time ahead, however, wasn't just about us. Heading to one of our family gatherings, I felt uncertain about how Helen and George would view our new arrangement. I wanted them to see how much our lives were changing for the better, but at the same time, old expectations loomed over us. But on this day, instead of fear, deep in my heart, there was hope. We were creating our own concept of family, and the magic was happening, even if there were barriers to overcome. Nurturing the support Isabella was beginning to feel was what truly mattered. And on this path, I realized that the adoption story was not only transforming our lives, but was intertwined with the destiny we were beginning to draw together, stronger and more beautiful each time. The following months unfolded with a new dynamic in our home. Isabella's presence brought light and life to the environment, and as the weeks passed, the true essence of being a family began to take root among us. We learned to laugh together, cry together, and face daily challenges that made our bond stronger. One sunny morning, while we were having a painting session, Isabella let out a radiant smile and said, "Mommy, you're the best mom in the world." Those words touched my heart in an indescribable way. The love we had been searching for was there, reflected in her innocence. It meant that every little effort was worthwhile, that we were managing to build a home for Isabella, where she felt safe and loved. Richard, in turn, took on an even more active role in the family dynamic. He began telling Isabella stories, filling our nights with tales of adventure, mystery, and magic. Her smile as she listened to his narratives was a powerful reward, and I saw how their connection grew each day, forming bonds that promised to unite us in happy and challenging situations. However, shadows of uncertainty still lingered in my heart whenever I thought about Helen and George's reaction to this new configuration. The pressure of family expectations hadn't completely disappeared, and the memories of how their opinions could influence our path left me apprehensive. The pending conversation with my in-laws began to seem inevitable, and I couldn't ignore the anxieties that were settling in. So, we decided it was time to face the situation head-on. We scheduled a visit with Helen and George, knowing it was crucial for them to see the reality of the new family we were creating. It wasn't just about introducing Isabel, but showing them that our choice was based on love and a desire to embrace. When we finally gathered for dinner, the air was tense, heavy with the expectation of what might happen. Initial conversations were brief, punctuated by nervous smiles and averted gazes. But I knew we couldn't postpone the conversation any longer. "We need to talk about our family," I began, my voice firmly resolute. Richard beside me held my hand, and his presence was a comfort. "We've decided to adopt Isabel, and we're very happy with this choice. We want you to be a part of this new chapter in our lives." Silence fell over the room. Helen seemed attentive, but her expression was hard to read. "Adopting a child is a huge responsibility," she finally said, her voice laced with concern. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" Richard, more than ever, was prepared to defend our decisions. "Yes, we are ready. We believe Isabel is the child we need in our lives, and we want her to be part of this family. These bonds aren't about blood. They're about love and support," he replied, the conviction in his voice showing that we were united on this journey. Over time, the conversation progressed, although an air of uncertainty still lingered. George asked questions about Isabel's adjustment, and I shared some of our experiences since our first meeting and the connection that was already beginning to form. The atmosphere, previously tense, began to relax as we talked about the joys and challenges of parenthood. As laughter and stories about our daily lives filled the table, I noticed Helen's hesitation remained. After a few comments, she finally admitted, "I let my own fears shape my opinions. I want to understand your new life better and get to know Isabel, but I need time to process all of this." This realization brought a sense of relief to our dialogue. There was, indeed, an undercurrent of hope. By the end of dinner, subtle gestures of acceptance began to appear. While there wasn't an immense expectation of immediate acceptance, it was a significant step. We had opened a space for honesty, and that was already a victory. In the days that followed, we invited Helen and George to meet Isabel. The anticipation was palpable, and the real challenges we would face as a family began to become more evident. We made a mural where everything that called Isabel new mixed with our own dreams and hopes for the new family. On the afternoon we finally introduced Isabel to Helen and George, the atmosphere was bathed in the warmth of the setting sun. Their approach brought feelings of stepping outside of comfort zones, a bit more delicately. Minor nerves aside, tensions began to dissipate when Isabel, in her innocent way, introduced herself. "Hi, aunts and uncles. Want to play with me?" Her spontaneity was met with warm smiles. As the day unfolded, the interactions became more fluid. As Isabel started drawing on one of the pads of paper we'd brought, conversations flowed more easily. Laughter and love filled the space, and even Helen and George's hesitation began to dissipate. What had seemed like a barrier transformed into a bridge that could unite us all. By the end of the day, As the sunlight began to fade, a new understanding hung over us. I felt relieved, seeing Isabel connect with her new family, and that was what truly mattered. Acceptance was blossoming unexpectedly. So, as we continued our journey together, the new reality we were building began to reflect not only our dreams, but also the love we cultivated in every small gesture. This good energy finally began to take root in our family, not as an obligation, but as a genuine desire to welcome and embrace what was to come. With that, Isabel's story and ours were intertwining into something beautiful and unique. I could only imagine what else our new reality would bring. Even with the challenges we might face tomorrow, we were ready to embrace each new moment, celebrating every step on our journey of love and acceptance.